Welcome back. In this video, we're going to look at putting together the collision so that the player no longer leaves the barrier. Now, when we look at the drawing here, the image, it does look like there's a barrier, but we have to remember it's just a 2D representation. This actually has no sort of physics associated with it, just the appearance, and neither does the saucer, right? So we need to sort of overlay or add a component to it to allow collisions to occur. And basically, like I said, we're just going to add the component. So over here, we're going to add a 2D collider. Basically, we'll just put overlay shapes there to identify the colliders. And of course, you need at least 2 colliders to have a collision. And generally the one that's moving, okay, because obviously if they're both static, they're both not moving, they won't collide. In order for a collision to occur, at least one of them has to have a rigid body. So what we're going to do is we'll basically place 4 colliders, so 4 box colliders, 2D box colliders around the perimeter of the image here, and then also 1 collider on the saucer or player itself. Since it's the easiest, let's just focus on the player here and add the collider. So what I'm going to do is make sure that my player is selected and come over and add a component. Now we could search through it just by going for colliders, but let's go through in Physics 2D and see which would probably work best here. So there's a variety of colliders, and we would just take the one that would sort of match up what we're doing with here. So obviously it's not shaped as a box. Probably the circle would work best. So we simply hit Circle Collider, okay? And I'm just going to zoom in here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger as well so we can see what's going on. We can see that the circle's a little bit too big. Now the idea is that with that player, there's sort of a box around it where that image came through, the sprite was created from, and then it's a PNG, so there's transparency here, but the actual sprite itself is a box. And we can actually see that if we go to our sprites and we click on this here, you can kind of see it right here. If you double click, whoops, I didn't mean to go that far, but you can see here that it's actually 534 pixels by 536, okay? And so this here, the checkerboard, is your transparency, all right? And then our actual image is here. So what it's doing is creating a circle with basically the radius of, well, I guess the diameter, easier way to say it, 534, 536. It's kind of an ellipse. All right, so what we want to do here is, like I said, get that better sizing. So I'm going to click back on the player there. We've got our circle slider, and what we do is we've got a radius there. So all we have to do is bring down that radius, and we can sort of manually do that. We want it to be pretty accurate there, so I think somewhere around there. Okay, I've got about 209. I always like to just make my numbers, nicely numbered. Okay, so 2.1 would work fine. You could probably go a little bit lower, a little bit higher. It doesn't really matter. You just want to make sure that when you play test the game, it feels right. Okay, so that is all you have to do. We've put a circle collider on our player. So next we got to deal with the background and putting on our colliders there. So what we want to do here is zoom out a little bit so we can see it all, and click on our background. And again, we're going to add a component here. Now what I'm going to do is add the Physics 2D, okay? And this is shaped more like a box, so I'm going to choose a box collider. Makes sense. Now you can see this green line, and actually if I get rid of the sprite render, it's very easy to see. That's where it's put the box collider, okay? Now, is there a problem? Well, let's find out. Where did my player go? It's interesting, my player has disappeared. Okay, got the sprite render on there. Now if I do that, there we go, player reappeared. If I do hit play, you can see that, even though my player was in the center, it's been pushed away. And what's happening here is that basically that box collider is, it's filling up this whole spot as a collision. So your player is colliding with that box collider. And so what it does is it applies a force to the one with the rigid body and basically pushes it out of the way. Okay, so obviously we can't just do what we've got here. Okay, I'm just going to turn off the play there. So what we need to do is really, create multiple box colliders to sort of create the outside and this wall, this boundary here. So what I can do is really just play around with this offset and the size. And I've already got one of the sizes correct, right? Like on the, if I sort of do the vertical ones here, okay, the Y is correct. So all I'm going to do is play around with the X here. So all I'm going to do is shrink it down, and I'm going to shrink it down to about there. Okay, I can modify it if I need to. Okay, there's my first one. And then what I'm going to do is just shift it over. So I'm going to offset it on the Y-axis. Oops, not the Y-axis, the X-axis. Let's move that back. Okay, on the X-axis. And I'm just going to bring it over here. Now, I don't really care, if it's sort of over on this left side. If it's a little bit too big, that's fine. All I'm really worried about is that it matches up here with this wall. So I might want to just sort of zoom in and see. And, it's a little bit difficult to see exactly where that wall starts and where it begins here. But maybe something about there. Okay, so then I've got my first part of my wall in. Now what I can do is, obviously I could redo all those steps, but the second wall sort of on the right side is going to be identical except for the offset. And really the offset should be just the positive 14.55. So what I'm going to do here is, in the little gear thing, I can copy a component. So I'm going to copy it. Okay, and then basically what I want to do is I want to paste that component as a new one. Okay, so everything is there. There's actually two on top of each other at the moment. And I'm just going to take this, I'm going to just make that positive. So I'm going to delete that negative. Okay, and you can see it lines up pretty well there. Okay, so again, depending on where you want to put it exactly, there's no real right or wrong answer. There's sort of varying answers there as to where you could place it. But I think that's a pretty good location as it is now. So we've got our two. Obviously, we've got to deal with the vertical, or sorry, the horizontal walls, okay, along the top and the bottom next. To do that, we'll just simply do what we did before and just move some numbers around. So what I'm going to do here again is, I think it's okay. We can just go click on here and paste component as new. So we've got another one. Now what we're going to do is basically just reverse these numbers. So I'm going to take this 14.55, I'm going to make this 0 on the X, oops, 0, and negative 14.55. Okay, and we can kind of see it here. Okay, it's moved, the offset, and then I'm going to play around with the size here. So I'm just going to switch those numbers. So 31.64. There, and you can see, and then this one has to be changed to, what did we use before? 3.76. Okay, and you can see that that lines up pretty well there. We don't have to worry about them not quite matching. Okay, like I said, as long as this collider here along the edge is fine. And we'll do the same thing. In fact, I'll just actually copy this one. It'll be easier. So copy component and then paste as new. And now basically it's just this that I need to change. So that's going to be positive 14.55, and it should move it up to the top. Good. So we've got our 4 colliders here. Okay, so our 4 box colliders making up the exterior wall. And then we had our collider on our key player. So let's just make sure this works first before we end the video. So hit play and then move our guy. Boom. Good. And I would just check all 4 walls. Okay. Doesn't hurt to make sure that everything seems to be okay. Yep. You'll notice there's a little bit of friction there against the wall, so we actually get the rotation of our UFO when it sort of puts against the wall there. Okay, it wasn't rotating at all in the center, although there's some latent rotation there. Okay, some inertia, but you can see it really starts to rotate when it's dragging against the wall there. Good. So we're done with that. The next thing we want to do is get the camera to sort of follow the player a little bit. So a very simple camera controller. Camera controllers can be very complex. This one will be a pretty simple one. But we'll see you in the next video there. And just make sure you always save your scene as well. All right, see you then.